Montana Territory, 1872. The prairie stretched endless beneath a tapestry of stars, indifferent to the small human figures that crossed its vastness. Among them was Josephine Gray, 20 years old with honey blonde hair that caught the moonlight as she sat alone outside her family's weathered homestead. The cool night air carried the scent of sage and distant wildfire as she wiped away tears with the sleeve of her faded calico dress. "This land takes more than it gives," she whispered to herself, a mantra learned through years of frontier hardship. 3 winters ago, her father had succumbed to pneumonia after a cattle drive. Last spring, her mother followed, leaving Josephine alone to manage their struggling homestead. The nearest neighbors were miles away, and the small town of Silver Creek offered little comfort with its rough saloons and suspicious glances toward a young woman living alone. Josephine had constructed careful walls around her heart. The frontier is no place for softness, she reminded herself daily. A woman alone must be harder than the land itself. She believed survival meant isolation, trusting no one, depending on no one. What she wanted was simple: to keep her family's land, to prove she could survive the Montana wilderness without becoming another tragic tale whispered in town. What she needed: connection, warmth, someone to share the brutal beauty of frontier life. She refused to acknowledge. Each evening, she would step outside after chores and look up at the endless stars. Sometimes she allowed herself to cry, the only witness the distant coyotes and the impassive constellations. Tonight was such a night, as she contemplated selling the failing homestead before winter arrived. The following afternoon changed everything. Josephine was returning from town with meager supplies when her wagon wool shattered on the rutted trail. The horses startled, nearly overturning the wagon before she could steady them. Stranded miles from home with the sun already lowering toward the western mountains, she faced the grim prospect of a night alone on the open prairie. As she struggled to unhitch the team, the drumming of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for her father's old revolver. Lone riders meant trouble for unaccompanied women. She steeled herself, raising the weapon as a dust-covered figure appeared around the bend. "Whoa there," called a clear voice as the rider slowed his chestnut gelding. "Seems like you could use some assistance, ma'am." The stranger dismounted gracefully, raising empty hands to show he meant no harm. Preston Cooper stood before her, 25 years old with wheat-colored hair and eyes the exact blue-green of mountain lakes. His lean frame spoke of hard work rather than hard living, and the light stubble on his jaw couldn't hide his youth. Unlike the weathered cowboys and grizzled miners that populated Silver Creek, there was something untarnished about him. "I can manage," Josephine replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Preston glanced at the broken wheel. "Begging your pardon, but that's a 2-person job at minimum." His smile was genuine, lacking the predatory edge she'd grown to expect from men encountering a woman alone. Preston Cooper, newly hired at the Rocking M, just arrived from Wyoming last week. Something about his straightforward manner made Josephine lower her weapon. "Josephine Gray. My homestead's about 3 miles east. Miss Gray, I'd be honored to help. My father taught me wagon repair before he taught me to ride." He moved with quiet confidence, examining the damage. "We can fix this temporary light to get you home. Then I can return tomorrow with proper tools." As they worked together under the fading light, Josephine found herself speaking more than she had in months. Preston listened intently as she explained her situation, his hands never idle as he skillfully repaired the wheel. "Living alone out here takes courage," he said simply, without patronizing. "But everyone needs help sometimes. That's not weakness, it's just being human." His words struck something deep within her. By the time the wagon was moving again, darkness had fallen, and Preston insisted on escorting her home. As they traveled side by side under the vast starry sky, Josephine felt a strange crack in her carefully constructed armor. Over the following weeks, Preston appeared regularly at the Gray homestead, always with a practical reason: returning tools, delivering mail from town, offering advice about the coming winter. Each visit chipped away at Josephine's resolve to remain isolated. She found herself watching the horizon for his approach, preparing extra coffee when she thought he might appear. Their connection deepened during a September cattle drive, when several Rocking M steers broke through her northern fence. Preston arrived with 2 other hands to retrieve them, staying behind to repair the damage while the others returned with the cattle. Those posts won't last another season, he observed, wiping sweat from his brow as they worked side by side. The ground's too soft here. Everything I build seems temporary, Josephine admitted, driving a stake with more force than necessary. Father had plans to divert the creek to strengthen this section, but she stopped, unwilling to reveal more vulnerability. Preston continued working, giving her space to collect herself. My father had plans too. A horse ranch in Wyoming. Wanted to raise Morgans. His voice remained steady, though something in it spoke of loss. Fever took him and mother both when I was 17. The simple sharing of grief created a bridge between them. As they finished the fence repairs, Josephine found herself inviting him to stay for supper, something she hadn't offered anyone since her mother's passing. Sitting across her small table, Preston spoke of his years working various ranches, saving money toward his own land someday. There's a parcel about 2 miles west of here that might come available. Good water rights, sheltered valley for winter grazing. Why Montana? Josephine asked. After Wyoming? His eyes met hers directly. Sometimes a man needs to start fresh. Leave old ghosts behind. Something in his expression suggested more than he was saying, creating the first real tension between them. What was Preston Cooper running from? The question lingered as autumn deepened toward winter. Their growing connection faced its first true test during an early October blizzard that struck without warning. Preston arrived at her door half frozen, having fought through the storm after seeing smoke from her chimney suddenly stop. He found Josephine struggling to clear a collapsed chimney flue, the cabin dangerously cold. Working together through the night, they restored the heat and weathered the storm. In the firelight, huddled beneath her mother's quilts for warmth, Preston told stories of his childhood that made her laugh for the first time in years. When he finally fell asleep from exhaustion, Josephine studied his face and felt something dangerous taking root in her heart. I cannot afford this feeling, she whispered to herself. The frontier takes everything you love. Yet watching him sleep, she could almost imagine a different future than endless solitude. By November, Preston had become essential to her life, helping with winter preparations while teaching her skills her father never had. How to properly bank a fire for the night, how to predict weather changes, how to mend harness leather. In return, she shared her knowledge of medicinal plants and home remedies learned from her mother. They established a rhythm that felt like partnership. Yet each time their hands accidentally touched or their eyes held too long, Josephine retreated behind her walls. The day Preston finally kissed her, after they'd successfully delivered a breech calf during a freezing rain, she allowed herself one moment of complete surrender before pushing him away. I can't, she said, backing toward the barn door. I won't survive losing anyone else. Josephine, he said her name like a prayer. Being alone isn't surviving. It's just existing. She fled to the house, leaving him standing in the barn, snow melting on his shoulders. That night, while Preston returned to the rocking am, Josephine sat beneath the stars and cried, torn between longing and fear. She didn't see the riders watching her homestead from the distant ridge. The following day, everything changed. Sheriff Mills arrived with news that shattered her emerging hopes. Preston Cooper was being sought for questioning about a bank robbery in Cheyenne. A man matching his description had been identified as part of a gang that had left 2 guards dead. I don't believe it, Josephine said firmly, though doubt crept into her heart. The unexplained money for land, his reluctance to speak of Wyoming, his periodic disappearances to check mail in town. Just telling you to be careful, Miss Gray, the sheriff said. The territory's full of men reinventing themselves. Some for honest reasons, some not. When Preston arrived that afternoon, Josephine confronted him immediately. His face paled at the accusation. I was in Cheyenne when that robbery happened, he admitted. But I wasn't part of it. My brother was. The truth spilled out. His younger brother had fallen in with a notorious gang. Preston had spent years trying to save him, even taking the blame for smaller crimes. The Cheyenne robbery had been the final breaking point. Preston had tried to stop it, but arrived too late. He'd fled north when witnesses confused the brothers. I came to Montana to start clean, he said, his eyes pleading for understanding. To earn honest money for honest land. To be the man I actually am, not the one people think I am. Josephine wanted to believe him, but her fear of betrayal was too strong. You should leave, she said coldly, and not come back. The hurt in his eyes cut her deeply, but she remained unmoved as he mounted his horse and rode away. That night, beneath the same stars that had witnessed so many lonely tears, she told herself she had done the right thing. The frontier was no place for trust. A week passed in miserable silence. Josephine threw herself into work, ignoring the emptiness Preston's absence had revealed. When 3 riders approached her homestead one afternoon, she assumed the sheriff had returned, until she saw the guns already drawn. "Cooper's woman," said the leader, a scarred man with cold eyes. "Where's he hiding?" With horrifying clarity, Josephine understood. These were members of the gang, looking for Preston. Whether he was innocent or guilty, they considered him a threat. She denied knowing his whereabouts, but they dismounted anyway, forcing their way into her home. "He's got something that belongs to us," the leader said, overturning her furniture. "And you're going to help us find him." Held captive in her own home, Josephine realized with bitter irony that her isolation, the very thing she'd clung to for safety, now ensured no one would come looking for her. The outlaws settled in to wait, convinced Preston would eventually return. On the 3rd day, when one of the men discovered her mother's locket and tried to pocket it, Josephine fought back. The resulting beating left her barely conscious, locked in the root cellar beneath the house. Through the haze of pain, she heard them discussing burning the homestead once Preston appeared. "Everyone dies alone out here," she thought, tasting blood. Her lifelong fear was being realized in the worst possible way. Half delirious, she didn't immediately recognize the sounds of gunfire above. When the cellar door finally opened, she expected to face her executioner. Instead, Preston's anguished face appeared in the lantern light. "Josephine," he breathed, gathering her broken form gently. "I'm so sorry." Through cracked lips, she asked, "How?" "Old Luther from the general store," Preston explained, carrying her up the stairs. "Said you hadn't been in for supplies. Knew something was wrong." Above, she glimpsed 2 motionless bodies. The 3rd outlaw had fled. Preston had come alone, risking everything despite her rejection. "They'll be back," she whispered. "More of them." "I know." His jaw tightened. "But first, I'm getting you to town." During the agonizing journey to Silver Creek, Josephine drifted in and out of consciousness. In lucid moments, she learned that Preston had gone to the territorial marshal with the full truth immediately after leaving her. He had been cleared of involvement in the robbery, but had agreed to help track down the remaining gang members, including his brother. "I've been trailing them for days," he explained. "Never thought they'd find you first." In town, the doctor's prognosis was cautiously optimistic. Bruised ribs, a concussion, but nothing permanently damaging. While she recovered, Preston worked with the marshal to prepare for the gang's inevitable return. The entire town, finally seeing beyond their prejudice against a woman living alone, rallied to defend one of their own. "Why did you come back?" Josephine asked Preston on the 4th night of her recovery. "After what I said to you." He took her hand gently. "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you." His eyes held her steadily. "I've spent my life trying to save people who didn't want saving. My brother, my mother, before the fever took her. Always failing. But with you, I saw someone as strong as the mountains, someone who could stand beside me rather than behind me." Tears filled her eyes. "I was wrong about so many things." "We both were," he said softly. 2 days later, the remaining gang members, 8 strong, including Preston's brother, rode into Silver Creek expecting to find Preston alone. Instead, they faced a town united, with the marshal and deputies strategically positioned. The ensuing gunfight was brief but devastating. When the smoke cleared, 4 outlaws lay dead, 3 were captured, and Preston stood face to face with his brother, both men wounded but alive. "It ends now, Jacob," Preston said, his gun steady despite the blood soaking his left side. "Enough people have been hurt." Josephine watched from the doctor's window as Preston's brother finally surrendered, ending a chapter of violence that had driven both men across the territory. The following weeks brought healing of both body and spirit. As December settled over the land, Preston's name was fully cleared. His testimony helped convict the surviving gang members, including his brother, who faced imprisonment rather than hanging due to Preston's intervention. When Josephine was strong enough to return home, she found that the townspeople had already repaired the damage to her homestead. Preston accompanied her, though something had shifted between them, a newfound honesty that acknowledged the fragility of frontier life without surrendering to it. On Christmas Eve, standing before her fireplace, Preston finally spoke the words that had been building between them. "I'm buying that land west of here," he said. "Good water, good grazing. Close enough to visit easily." He paused, gathering courage. "Or close enough to join, if two properties became one." Josephine met his gaze steadily. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Cooper?" His smile was warm in the firelight. "I'm proposing everything, Miss Gray. A partnership in every sense. I won't promise the frontier will be kind. We both know better. But I can promise you won't face it alone again." Taking her hands in his, he continued, "Under these prairie stars, I make you this vow. You'll never shed tears alone again. Whatever joys or sorrows come, we'll face them together." The walls around Josephine's heart, built through years of loss and reinforced by frontier hardship, finally crumbled completely. "Yes," she whispered, stepping into his embrace. "To everything." They were married in the spring of 1873, joining their properties and their lives. The homestead that had once echoed with Josephine's solitary footsteps gradually filled with new sounds. Preston's laughter, the construction of additional rooms, and eventually, the cries of their firstborn son. 5 years later, their ranch, named Starlight in remembrance of those lonely nights transformed by love, had become one of the most prosperous in the county. The couple's reputation for fair dealings and generous help to newcomers made them respected throughout the territory. On summer evenings, they would still sit together beneath the vast Montana sky, watching the stars emerge. Sometimes Josephine would recall those lonely tears shed in darkness, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. "You kept your promise," she told Preston one such evening, their 2 young children already asleep inside. About the tears, his arm tightened around her shoulders. "Which doesn't mean you haven't cried." "But never alone," she answered, resting her head against him. "And that has made all the difference." Above them, the prairie stars continued their eternal journey, witnesses to the truth both had finally embraced, that even in the harsh wilderness of the American frontier, the human heart's greatest strength wasn't isolation but connection, and the courage to love despite all risk.